and she was 51. She had cancer.
Oh, boy.
And she had a sister that lived in Baltimore, and her children were our first cousins, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So when my mom died, she worked at a clothing store in Baltimore called Hochul Cohen, Kohn. She was a seamstress, and she would embroider towels people would want their initial, and she would
Oh, yeah.
repair. And my grandmother, her mother, uh, sewed for people, and that she was a very good seamstress. So, but anyway, when my mother passed away, she came with two of her children, which would be my first cousins. They had four children. The two older ones were married, and the two younger ones were not married. So the two younger ones came to live with us, and the aunt came to live with us because, like I said, two of my older brothers were in the service by this time. So when she came, she helped. I don't know what we'd have done without.
Hi, this is Sarah, and you're listening to a special three-part series on Ladies First Not Really, where I had the opportunity to interview 94-year-old Violet Pennick, who was willing to share her life story with me and memories of World War II. This is part two.
She did her washing, she cooked, and in a way, I feel like maybe she was glad because she had to work every day and she didn't have hardly enough money sometimes to get to work because things were pretty rough all over back then. She was a real good cook too, and so she brought her two younger children, and they lived with us then. And the house was big enough that we just assimilated everybody, two or three to a room or something. And like I say, my two older brothers were gone then. We had the three bedrooms upstairs. My dad didn't like to sleep upstairs, so he took, let's see, how did it work? He took our dining room downstairs and made that his bedroom, and we ate in the kitchen. They had a little breakfast nook like, and it was big enough to put a long table with a bench. And we just ate there all the time. Anytime company, we just eat there
Okay.
because he just wanted on the first floor. So when she came, my mother passed away. My older brother was killed during World War II. He was a co pilot, and they were stationed. I mean, they had been on a mission, and they had landed their plane in Sicily to have it serviced. And then they took off from Sicily to go back to wherever they were stationed. I don't know. I don't remember where that was. And so they had a new um, oh, what do the people call that give directions on planes? What's the title? Well, you know
Yes.
what I'm talking about.
Yes, I can't think of it.
He was new, and I think my brother had written home, the one that was killed, saying, "We have a new whatever." I can't, he was the one that kept the records as to where they were flying and which way to go and this kind of thing. And so he said, "We have a new so and so." And he said, we don't, they don't cherish the idea of having a new one of those when they're going on missions. They want somebody experienced. But anyway, we just think that maybe they gave the wrong directions. And when they took off from Sicily, they thought they were over the ocean, but they weren't. They were over land. And so they didn't get the plane high enough and they crashed in a uh, field. Had Italy somewhere maybe, I don't know. Had a rock wall, and the plane hit the rock wall, and they were all killed. So he died in World War II,
How old was your brother?
21.
Wow.
Yeah, and um, he was the oldest, and my mother just cherished him. Being the oldest. Well, she loved all her children,
Sure.
but I just remember hearing a lot about him. He was just well, I don't like to brag about my brothers, but everybody liked him. He was just a good, funny, witty, and nice looking. And so that really speeded her death up, I think. And she died. Let's see, this was in December when she got the word. And she died in January from the cancer.
Yeah. Do you remember what year?
No, I don't. Must have been 19. But that really 41 tore her up naturally, and us too, being the younger children and brothers and sisters. Then after that was when my aunt came to live with us because with the other children at home. So when she came to live with us, and after a while, went to church with us and all, and then I don't know. My dad, I guess after a certain amount of time, I guess he kind of fell in love with her, and then they got married.
Really?
So my aunt became my stepmother.
Oh my goodness.
And then all the cousins became stepbrothers and sisters. And everybody that, when I'm telling them, friends, how do you keep all that straight? They became and they were originally my cousins, and they
Now
became my
stepbrothers, sisters. Oh, that's fun.
And then all their children became my nieces and step nieces and nephews. And, it's mind-boggling even for me. So, anyway, that's the story of growing up, and then after she came and stayed with us for a while, I guess then I became like, well, maybe I got a job, an insurance company, and then I met my future husband, and so then I got married when I was 20, I think, and, he was 21. And we had to get permission then to do that because I remember my father going up to the courthouse in Salem, Virginia, which is a little town that was the county seat, so to speak, that you had to go up there to sign paper. And that sounds kind of strange today, I guess. But anyway, then we got married, and then we moved to let's see, before my husband he went into the service. I didn't know him then. He worked at GMAC in Roanoke, and my sister worked there too. So she kept talking about Charlie, Charlie, Charlie. She said, "You gotta meet Charlie." And I said, "Okay." I was going with another fella. After he went in the service, she said, "Why don't you just start writing to him? He's probably lonely." So I started writing to him. So when he came in on leave, I met him. And we didn't know each other but about 3 or 4 months, and we got married.
Aw.
So then I went to Kansas, Colorado, Alabama with him. And then we had the last stop was Kansas. He was about 2.5 years into his service then. And I had 2 children while we were in Kansas. So we went to Alabama first. And then he thought he was going to have to go overseas. And he had put in for auditing school. He was uh, an accountant at GMAC before he went into the service. So he put in for auditing school when we were in Alabama, and he wasn't sure if that was going to come through before they shipped him overseas, and I would have to go back home and live with my parents. So just about the day uh, that I was planning to go back home, he got a notice from this auditing school in Colorado. We want you to come and be in our auditing staff. And he was still in service at this time, of course. So then we packed up our stuff from Alabama and went to Colorado, and he went to auditing school. Then from there, we went to Kansas, and that's where their 2 children were born. And we were there for about 2.5 years at this Salina Air Force Base.
Oh.
So, and then that's how my 2 children came to be. And, I probably left out a lot, but between the time my stepmother came and the time I got married. But
What year did you get married?
1952.
Okay.
February 2nd, which is Groundhog's Day. My husband said, "We can get married on Groundhog's Day. That way we will always remember when it is." So every time Groundhog's Day comes around, I know I celebrate one of my anniversaries.
It's hilarious.
But
I wanted to ask you about the war time frame. So I know obviously Pearl Harbor, 41 was when the U.S. got involved. And I know you would, so you were pretty young then, but do you remember just maybe how like talks or how the temperature was here leading up to that?
We, the American people, we and families, we had to practice because we didn't know if we were going to be in war. So we had to practice uh, air raids, and we'd have to. You may have heard all this before, but they would let us know ahead of time, like we might have a air raid maybe over the United States. So we had to practice turning out our lights so that there would be no lights on for enemy planes to see houses. So we had to practice that every now and then. And of course, like I said, the shoes were rationed and everything was rationed. And we were afraid, I mean, as a child, I don't remember being afraid. But, of course, my oldest brother was killed during the war. My brother next to him was in England in the army at that time. And so we became conscious of what might happen if the enemy would attack America. So we had to practice air raids, and uh, they would let us know when this would happen. We had to turn all our lights off, pull our shades down, and so that was kind of a little scary time. But,
Sure.
uh,
Did you start doing that after Pearl Harbor, or was it?
it was after
That's what
Pearl Harbor.
triggered that.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned your oldest brother was killed, and your second brother made it back.
Yes, he
Okay.
did. Uh-huh. Yeah, he was in England, but I don't know if he was stationed. I don't think he was stationed in any of the all those bombings that took place in London and all that during that time. It just tore up a lot of the cities there close to London. And I think he was in a different place. He worked on planes. So I think his was pretty safe as far as I know.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
After the war ended, what was it like? Because we always think about like, oh, all right, the war ends, everyone comes home, but then what, right? So can you remember what life was like? Folks coming back? How did everyone kind of get back to normal life? Did they get back to normal life?
Yeah, I think pretty much people did. And of course, it was a big celebration at the end of the war. Everybody, all cities were just hilarious and just enjoying peacetime and celebrating. And Roanoke was crowded with people, just, and and of course, things kind of calmed down. We didn't have the rationing anymore, and things went back to normal pretty fast, if I remember correctly. It settled down pretty much, as far as I remember. Of course, I was the youngest of six. Gradually, people became more they got jobs and we had more food available, but it just seemed like it just settled down all of a sudden. Nothing was rationed. You could have whatever you wanted, sugar and all that kind of stuff. Just do canning, and that I think it went back pretty fast to normal.
That's incredible to
Mhm.
just think about going through all that time and then just rolling back into everyday life as if nothing happened.
Of course, now from my parents' standpoint, might have been a little different. I don't know, but I just remembered that everything. We went back to school, and well, not back to school when we were going to school all that time anyway. But it just people didn't talk about it that much, or we didn't hear the news of all that going on in England and Germany and all that type of talk that was going on during the war. Of course, my mother had passed away, and that left a void too. And then we had to learn how to live with my aunt and the other two children coming. And that all went pretty peaceful. And just recently, I was thinking about her leaving. She had two children living in Baltimore, and they had families. I didn't think much about her leaving them, although they were a little upset because they stayed in Baltimore with their families, and they didn't much like her coming to my house. You know, you can imagine your mother living with you after you were married and your children, and all of a sudden she's going somewhere else to stay.
Right.
So you probably wouldn't have liked it either.
They were a little
And I
offended.
can remember especially the older one, was a little upset at that time because she had come to stay with us. But I was too young to know what their feelings were during that time. I just remembered that the older one, especially, was really upset, although she had two children at that time and a husband. So later in life, I just got to thinking, I said, I can understand why they were so upset now because if it'd been my mother moving away from me after I'd had married two children that you wanted a grandmother around, I could understand it. But back then, I didn't understand it.
Sure.
I couldn't understand why she was so upset with her mother. She got okay after a while because they would come down and visit us on the farm, bring their kids, and it was kind of a good time. And we just made room for them and, stacked everybody in some of the bedrooms, and that was it. So,
What a cool story, though.
but it was fun. We liked our cousins, and so we got along pretty well together. Thank goodness for that.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. So,
Now, shortly after that's awesome.
mm-hmm. So,
Now, shortly after World War II ends, then the Korean War
mm-hmm.
picks up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, can you tell me, do you remember much about the Korean War on this side, or?
Well, that was when I married my husband,
Okay.
and that was going on while when we got married. So, of course, I was worried about him having to go overseas after we first got married, and I didn't want to go back home and live. And so that was when the school came in for him, the auditing school came in for him. So I didn't feel the effects of it as much maybe as other people because maybe their husbands or their family had to go overseas to or participate in the Korean War.
Okay. So was your husband in the like, was he drafted or he just joined the
He joined,
service?
so he was in for 4 years in the Air Force.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
And then after he got out of the Air Force, we went back to Roanoke, and he was transferred from the Roanoke GMAC office to the Richmond GMAC office and they said if anybody left the company to join the war, to enlist, they would promise them a job when they got back. So he went back to Roanoke to the GMAC office, and they said, we don't have any space for you. We're going to transfer you to Richmond. So then we moved to Richmond then.
Oh, okay.
And then from Richmond, we went to DC, and he worked there for a while. Then he retired when he was only like 48
Wow.
because I don't know, I didn't want him to retire so early because I was wondering, well, what are we going to do? He said, it's getting so bad. He was kind of the office manager and also the accountant, and it was rough in DC. And so he wanted to be transferred back to Roanoke, and they didn't have an opening. And so he said, I think I'm going to retire. And I said, well, so early. I wasn't for it. But anyway, he said, we'll do okay. We'll do fine. He was 48. Yeah. And so then we moved from DC. Where would he, where would we like to live? Because we had ties to our family, of course, in Roanoke. His family was from Roanoke. And I don't know, both families were pretty big. His family was large, mine was large, and we were kind of carefree then. And I said, and our boys were grown then. They had started college from DC area. We said, well, let's go to Greenville, South Carolina, because we'd heard that was a good place to live. That was crazy. So we went, took a trip there, and we loved it there. And I said, well, we won't have any of the family here. And he said, well, we'll move back to Roanoke in a few years. We'll just go down here for a while. But we loved it there. And then we were there 15 years. And I started getting it hankering. I wanted to go back to my hometown. And he told me, he said, anytime you want to move from here back to Raleigh, he said, we'll go. And so, and we met wonderful people there, the church and everything. We had so many good friends. And so then from there, I said, you said that we'd move back if I wanted to. And I said, let's think about going back. He said, okay. He said, we'll do that. So we knew this couple from Roanoke. He was a builder, and he told us if we ever wanted to move back to Roanoke, he would build us a house, at cost. When he told us that, we went to a funeral or something in Roanoke, and this was about 2 years before we moved, maybe 1 year or 6 months before we moved. He said, if you want to move back here, he said, I'd love for y'all to come back because they were really good buddies.
Aw.
We talked it over and he said, he wants to build us a house. Good gracious, save us a lot of money. We could have a place where we wanted to go. And so then we went up and we looked around for lots and everything. We saw one that we really liked in Benton, Virginia, which is it's just next to Roanoke. It's the same place just about. And had a nice little view of the mountains and everything. And that was the only lot left in this little section. There were about one, two, three, four, five, about 7 houses there in this area. I said, well, let's see if it had a sold sign on the lot. Just ask had a phone number. Just call the guy and see if he wants to sell it. He said, I don't think it's going to be possible. So anyway, we got the name. We called the guy and he said, yeah, I'd like to sell that. I mean, it just, and I tell you, the good Lord's watched over us all of our life, I think, and it's wonderful to have that filled up. And my husband was so excited. And he said, I'll give you 35,000. I said, why did you do that? Why didn't you just ask him how much because he might have sold it for 30,000, 25,000. And that's not one like him. He was a finance person. He always would know exactly how to handle things. But he was so excited that he said he gave him a price instead of him giving us a price. So anyway, he said, "Oh yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that. That's good." We paid him for the lot, and then our friend that we said if we moved back, he built our house for us at cost. And it was a beautiful home. I mean, it wasn't a really and all the other homes that were in this little area were all individually built. So it was a real nice neighborhood, and people were very, very nice. So I don't know how I tell you, the good Lord has watched over us all the time we were married and before, because I always went to church when I was growing up. Believed, of course, and believed in God. And my family always went to church. But anyway, I just felt like the Lord was really working for us,
That's
and
awesome.
still is. We had the house built, and we met the neighbors were so nice, and we'd get together for picnics and just neighborly. When we got older, like I think we were 80 in our 88 or something like that. My son here, he said, y'all ought to think about moving pretty soon, selling your house. And the house was beginning. I don't know, we lived there 20 years, I guess. And it was beginning to need some little work here and there. And I said, yeah, maybe this is not a bad idea. We're both getting older. And our children, of course, were grown and we had one here and wanted us to move here. And our other son was in Frostburg, Maryland. I don't know if you know where that is. Cumberland, Maryland.
Oh, yeah.
Sold our house and moved here. And so we've been here ever since.
Wow.
And then maybe we were here about 3 years, and my husband, he wanted a shoulder replacement. And of course, my son was was a doctor here in the ER.
Oh, nice.
So he said, "Well," he said, "you can come here. We got plenty of good doctors, and you'll get your shoulder replaced." And so he did get his shoulder replaced. But then when he was taking his exercise from the shoulder replacement, his back kept bothering him. And so they would look at it and say, "Well, I don't know. His shoulders are doing fine. We don't know." So they took an x ray or something, and they discovered he had the bone cancer of his neck bone. So then we went to a cancer specialist, and he gave him
Chemo.
chemo. Uh, and he took that for 3 times, and he'd never been sick hardly at all in his lifetime, and he just couldn't take it, and men just, hate stuff like that, and so he finally said, the doctor told him, said, "If you take this, you'll live to be 98," because he was already, like, 88, 89, and so he said, "If you keep these treatments, you won't have any problem. You'll live to be an old person."
Mhm.
Uh, he just couldn't do it. So he gave it up and he died. That was 3 or 4 years ago. And during the meantime, we lost our son that lived in Maryland because he got brain cancer.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, my son died after my husband died, and about a year after, actually. So that was pretty rough. I mean, my son had to have the operation to see if the cancer was non-malignant or malignant. So we went up when he had that operation, and they took the longest time to let us know. So finally, they came back and said, "Yeah, it was malignant, and it was pretty far gone." So he died about 6 months later. Then
Oh
after
my
my
goodness. That's horrible.
yeah,
Those that lived through such tumultuous time, I mean, all come out saying it was life, we moved on, no one got therapy. We just sucked it up and did it.
well,
And
that's right.
that's really amazing to
You have
come out of all of that, that
Exactly.
mindset and
Yeah.
still being positive and grateful. And I just love that. And I think that's such a great piece for people to hear
Yeah.
because it was the period. But at the end,
We still came out of it.
yeah, came
Yes.
out and still positive and looking back on the good
Uh-huh.
and not just dwelling on the negative. And I think
Right.
that's really it's an important piece to take away
Yes,
from that.
that's true. And a lot of the young people today, they don't know what it was like back then. I hate to say about the generation coming. We didn't have a lot of the stuff that they have now, all the play things you play with the computers and all that kind of thing. And I think we were so much better off
Mm-hmm.
in some ways that you got acquainted with your neighbors because you didn't have anything else. You didn't sit at home doing this and that, and you were out in the air and the sunshine, and people were probably healthier back then, and you didn't have a lot of extra money for candy and sweets and all this stuff that wasn't good for you. You had more fresh stuff and good food. Maybe a lot of people did not have all that. I was very blessed that we had the farm food, and fruits, any kind of fruits all the time, even during the war when other people didn't have anything to eat. And that was a rough time for a lot of people. But we were very blessed when we were growing up that we had the farm and we had good food. And my father had 2 honeybee things, and uh, the all the fruit trees gave the honeybees the whatever they needed to make the honey. And so I can still remember him going out with the thing on his head, and collecting the honey. We used to watch, and he didn't have anything on his arms, and the bees would be on his arms, and we'd look at him and say, "Good gracious, why aren't you being stung?" And he never got stung, but maybe he did, but he
Oh my
didn't.
goodness.
I think your generation was a little harder, I think, than actually we were, even though we had the war. The fact that you had more um, automated things, and your children especially, and um, maybe you kind of limit them as to how long they're on computer, like a lot of parents do.
Mm-hmm.
But we just didn't have any of that. We had to go outside. We had to get fresh air. We had to just be out in the open with our friends and all. And so it was a little healthier atmosphere. But that doesn't mean that all kids today are inside people. That doesn't mean that. But there's a lot of people that just don't like to go outside and play. They want to work on a computer or just watch a movie. I think all in all, the people at my table, we all say we were born in the best of times and that we lived in the best of times because you don't know what the future's going to be like. Think about all the things that have come into being in my generation and what's it going to be like, all this automated, um, computerized stuff. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. I mean, you think there's nothing else in the world to be invented, but yet there'll be plenty of things that smart people will come up with, and you just kind of feel a little sorry for your grandkids and growing up in the world now than we grew up. When we went to DC, my boys were still small, and so I worked part time, temporarily, like for Kelly Girls, or I don't know if you know, that's an organization that when you're working for them, they tell you where to go. That's a temporary agency.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I don't know if they were called Kelly Girl or not, maybe other names, but I wanted to be home with my boys as much as I could. So I didn't want a full time job that I go work every day. So I worked for that agency that would call and tell me where to go. Hey, they need a secretary over here, and so and so. Would you like to go take that job? It's going to be for a week. I said, yeah, I'll do it. So I might work for a week at this secretarial position, and then I'd be home a lot of the times when they would come home from school. I said, well, I can't work, but so and so, that's okay. You can get off at 3 if you want. So I was at home with them an awful lot when they were growing up.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it worked out. And I got to know so many people. And I liked it because I wasn't compelled to have to stick at one job all the time. I was up meeting new people, and that affected my personality quite a bit. I think that you realize so many different types of people in the world. They all have different problems. And I was kind of like you interviewing me that I learned they would tell me to do lunch hour. My kid got in trouble the other day, and you just let them talk, and you got to know a lot about people. It was kind of a growing up situation for me, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed meeting different people, and I think it's affected my life now that I came here. And I went to so many different places, and it was a really good experience for me.
That's
And
awesome.
more so than if I'd had one job and you meet the same people every day. And I kind of enjoyed going to different places. And you'd be surprised the difference in companies, people. And finally, when we went to South Carolina, I worked for a group of lawyers. And I didn't work all the time. Just when somebody was on vacation, they would call me. And that was when computers were coming in. And I didn't know anything about computers. And the typewriters were different, the keyboard, the computers, and all this stuff. But you had so many people that the girls would be so helpful. I'd say, can you look at this? I can figure this out. They were all so nice. I really enjoyed that aspect of my working life. And it affects your personality to a certain degree. I was always a real shy person. I don't know, just my husband was always the outgoing one. And but it helped me grow up to a certain extent. On the job training of all the different companies in DC, they had a lot of different kinds of government jobs that I went to, and it was kind of fun. Listened to a lot of stories, and it made me a better person, I think. And then I also learned a lot.
Sure.
So I got an education actually.
On the job training.
That's right.
If you could tell all the women today something, what would you tell them?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. Well, I guess an important aspect of my life was to believe in the Lord, to go to church, and to put others before yourself, and always be concerned with other people and their hardship, and listen. Listen to other people. So many times you want to talk about yourself so much. I mean, I was never, I always like to listen to people and some of the hardships they've had, and try to be a good friend. Help them as much as you can. Just be aware of other people and their problems. I know there's a lot of times when you're talking to people and you're serious, you want to say something. Then I've had people sort of butt into, oh, yeah, that reminds me. When I was, and I had to go, I did this and I did that. And the conversation, they don't want to hear what you have to say,
Right.
And well, just let them talk. Maybe they feel compelled to tell something. Just let it go and let them talk.
Well, thank you so much for letting me talk to you and telling your story. And I appreciate you let me share your story too, because I know
Well,
lots of women will be really interested to hear it. For more information, visit my blog at rebelliouscorsets.com.